Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, we're starting off. I'm wearing my Auburn basketball shirt. We're going to talk a little Auburn basketball. And, it pains me to say it, but it was a really rough week for Auburn basketball. Things seemed like they were getting a little better. They dominated Georgia, which was good because Georgia beat them earlier in the season. And they go on the road, and first they play an outstanding defensive game against Tennessee. Now, to be the fair fan that I am, Tennessee's offense is very hit or miss. Tennessee wins games by playing basically, Virginia Tony Bennett style basketball, where I think Tennessee's held like something like 9 or 10 opponents below 50 points. And this game was a Tony Bennett special right here. I'm aware that Rick Barnes is the coach of Tennessee, but this is much more Tony Bennett-ish than what we've seen in the past. And they beat Auburn 46-43. And Joe, I was watching this game and I was so disgusted by the lack of offense that I almost even turned it off before it got really exciting at the end. I think Tennessee was beating Auburn by about 8 with like a minute and a half left, which seemed like an eternity of points based on the way the scoring was going. Auburn made a three-pointer. I think they had 2 missed free throws, and they were able to come back and score again. It got to be a 3-point game, and they were able to get a shot off at the end. And, I mean, anybody that has Twitter right now sees all the Auburn Twitter mafia tweeting about it, but it was an egregious non-foul call. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen somebody get hit that hard from a three-pointer and not get called. Basically, the Tennessee big man like hip checked Wendell Green, knocked him down, and somehow the ref swallowed the whistle. And they would have had 3 free throw shots. And I know me and other people that are Auburn basketball fans think about the fact that, they missed out on the chance to go to the national championship game because, a player like barely touched the finger of Kyle Guy when he was shooting a three-pointer. And meanwhile, Wendell Green can be basically tackled and they don't call a foul.
Yeah, that can be really inconsistent with that. And I can remember like just playing basketball myself. I would always get frustrated sometimes. Like you barely touch a player and you hear like a whistle, but then like to your point, you see kind of that inconsistency at times too. And so, part of it probably is also trying to protect Virginia as maybe a formidable Final Four, candidate for the SEC this year as a conference. But shockingly, I think I saw Tennessee. Shockingly, Tennessee lost to, I think, Vanderbilt last night or tonight.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I think Tennessee at the time Auburn was playing them was the number 2 overall team. And so it makes sense that you would want to give them a little bit more calls. But this one was above and beyond in just terms of terribleness. Like, I couldn't believe they didn't call it. And, it was one where I think it almost would have been worth it for Bruce Pearl to say something. I know that you're not supposed to speak about that kind of stuff, but basketball officiating, I think, is by far the worst officiating and least consistent.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. It's kind of akin to sometimes like the holding penalties we see in football, but like it can be an issue on almost on every play because you're going to have contact. And yeah, I mean the inconsistency is always frustrated me about the game.
Yeah, me too. But here's the one thing I will say. You shouldn't ever expect to win a game when you score 43 points or even expect to go to overtime if you score 46. So I do feel like that call was really bad. Now, Wendell Green still would have had to make all 3 free throws, and they still would have had to win the game in overtime. But it is a shame that they did not get that opportunity. But I will say you can't hold it against them because if you can't score 46 points, then shame on you.
Right. You don't want to be in that situation to begin with.
That's right. Joe, then they followed up with what seemed to be a really great first half performance. They were beating Texas A&M by, I think at one point, like 12 points. But the foul bugaboo got to them. And, I mean, A&M had 33 free throws made. I think they were 33 out of 37. And, I mean, that's just an ungodly amount of free throws that you got right there. And I think on the converse, Auburn only had 12 free throws even attempted. And I think they were like 7 for 12 from the free throw line. And you can pretty much not win any games when that's the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And, it's one of those things where I feel like free throw disparity does not get enough traction at times, because when you look at the end of a game, if you attempt like 20 something more free throws than your opponent, like that's so many more opportunities that the opponent did not have. And it kind of harkens back to what we're talking about, with some of the inconsistency of a foul versus not a foul.
Yeah, and I mean, in this game too, I know that one of the big things in the first half, I think at this point Auburn was winning by 11 or 12. There have been multiple instances where the A&M players have been taunting Auburn players, and there were no, technical fouls called. And I think Alan Flanagan had a dunk for Auburn, and he taunted the bench, and immediately when he did it, they called a technical against him. And and that one was a really rough one because they had just gotten, I think, up to a 12-point lead, and then all of a sudden you give them the 2 free throws and the ball back. And I think they cut it to 7, like right after that.
And then also the thing about going to the free throw line, if you get rewarded with that opportunity, sometimes if you're having a cold shooting night, that gives you a spark plug. You can see the ball go through the basket, and that can make all the difference at times.
Oh, definitely did. Because I think Auburn actually shot the other night close to 70% from the floor. I mean, they put up like 78 points. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, you just can't overcome a free throw disparity like that. And they ended up losing by 5 points. And, I mean, they were, tied at a couple points even in the last couple minutes of the game. And so that was definitely a very interesting game. And, I mean, I think some of it was, officials that were very different than the ones they had against Tennessee, who were letting a lot of things happen. These guys were calling everything. I mean, if you touched them on the arm, they were calling a foul, But it's just, it's weird. And, this game too, I noticed it. I've been saying it for the last couple of years. Auburn had a chance to tie the game up with about 45 seconds left. They were down by 3, and Wendell Green took a bad shot and missed it and didn't even pass the ball. And this is something that I've seen for the last 2 years. Even when they had Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, when the game was close at the end and they needed someone to take a shot, it was always Wendell Green taking the shot, and he always missed it. I've never seen him make a shot at the end of the game that mattered.
Mm-hmm. And that's always a concern, when you either lack a go-to scorer at the end of a game in tournament time, or, if you have the wrong guy that's going to notoriously take those shots. And I think that would be the concern for me, with Purdue in the NCAA tournament, is that they go to a guard in lieu of Edey in one of those situations.
Yeah, and that's something too. We can talk about Purdue in a second, but I think Johnny Broome is probably Auburn's best consistent scorer right now, and I feel like I never see him get the ball at the end of these games. And the thing is unless you're losing by 3 points, why not give it to your guy inside? And to be honest, even if you are losing by 3 points and there's more than 20 seconds left, I still think it's worth it to try and get the 2. Maybe he gets an and 1.
Yeah, I mean, at this level in basketball, these coaches make too much money. They should not let just anybody take these shots. This is not like some playground, basketball game where they're just dribbling up the court and you have somebody that's a ball hog. Like, you got to address this as a team. And so I think that that's definitely an adjustment they need, to make going forward to make sure you have the right person taking those shots.
Yeah, and I mean, I think right now that, in my mind, is the thing that keeps Auburn from maybe not even winning a game in the NCAA tournament, is the fact that I don't know that if it's a close game, who's going to take the shot. And if it's going to be Wendell Green, then I like what he does for 59 or for 39 minutes of the game. I generally like what Wendell Green does. But something about him, he takes shots that don't make sense at the end of the games, and he always misses them, and usually misses them pretty badly, like air balls.
Mm-hmm. I know exactly what you mean.
Well, and you were talking about Purdue. So Purdue, of course, has been the number 1 team pretty much this entire season. I think going into the other night against Indiana, they only lost 1 game. And Indiana in front of a packed Assembly Hall, harking us back to the days of Bobby Knight. Huge win there, great environment. And for them to beat their rival Purdue, it was kind of good to see Indiana back in the place we feel like they should be.
Absolutely, Dan. And, I love just the matchup with these two teams because, in addition to the rivalry, you've got the player matchup. You've got Trace Jackson Davis, one of the best players in the country. You've got Zach Edey. And these are guys that have been, on their teams 3, 4, 5 years respectively. And that's something right now we really lack in college sports and in college basketball. We don't see enough teams have the same cast of players for 3 or 4 years where you can allow, a rivalry to really come to fruition. And that's something we got to see the other night.
Yeah, Joe. I mean, one good thing that I think we've seen from from the COVID era of sports is getting to see these extra years of eligibility for players. And it's not just in college basketball. You saw it in football with players like Max Duggan that come in for their 5th year and have a great special year, or Stetson Bennett at 25 years old playing in a national championship. But with basketball, I mean, it really makes a difference. I think Trace Jackson Davis is a 5th-year senior. I think Edey is either a 4th or a 5th-year guy. And they're both guys that started off that, they were pretty buried on the depth chart. I think it took them a year or two to even get on the floor. Even someone like Zach Edey, who I think right now is probably a shoe-in for Player of the Year.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, I love the fact, they didn't transfer, they stayed there. And I just feel like, we need more guys like that in college basketball.
Yeah. And what it is doing, too, I think, is it's making like kind of a different hierarchy of basketball this year, because so many of these teams are teams that have 5th and even 6th-year seniors. And so you're seeing some teams you're not used to seeing at that level, in the top 5, top 10. And I mean, great example is Purdue being number 1. I mean, Purdue is a good basketball program. They have a solid history. I mean, Gene Cady had some really good Purdue teams back in the day. Matt Painter's been there a while, and he tends to have teams that do well during the regular season, but for some reason, his brand of basketball, which is old school, it's all about bigs. He's that's what he is. Zach Edey's 7'6", like that's what he likes to put out there. These just giants, and he likes to do old school feed it in the post basketball. It works great during the regular season, but the old cliche that the NCAA tournament is all about guard play definitely tends to be true with Purdue, because I mean, we see them go out in the 2nd, the 3rd round some years where they have great teams, like including when last year they lost to St. Peter's.
Yeah, they're kind of known as that notorious team that just can't get over the hump and get to a Final Four. They've had some close calls, had the heart-wrenching loss to Virginia in the Elite Eight a few years ago with Carson Edwards. I think Virginia made almost like a half-court shot to send the game into overtime, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's the year they won the national title too. Mm-hmm. And then you had the year, I think maybe his best team with Robbie Hummel. Hummel gets hurt before the season like 12 years ago, and he can't play, and they were probably a Final Four team with him. And so they've had some bad luck, but I think that this year they've had a lot of success. But obviously with the success, people are really going to concentrate on, how far they get in the tournament.
Yeah, that's going to be big, because, I mean, they're going to be a team that's favored to make the Final Four. And, I don't know if they're going to be the betting favorite to win the national championship. I'm not sure. I still think there's a good chance that a lot of people might just go ahead and pencil in Kansas, even though Kansas has had a little bit of, some rough stretches. But I would say that Purdue is going to be in the top 3 of the betting favorites to win it all.
Yeah, and this will be a hard year, too, to pick. I think, there's not just that dominant team. You got Houston, you got a few teams that I think will be formidable.
Right, and Houston's been good for a couple years now, but they didn't lose anybody, and that's a good example. And another one that I have that's a top 5 team right now that I think really exemplifies this COVID era of basketball and getting to have these players for a while is Kansas State. Jerome Tang is doing a great job with this group, who not a lot of big names in it, but they've all been there for a while, and they've had some rough seasons, but Tang is definitely taken what he's learned from Scott Drew, and Kansas State's a really good basketball program right now and might be a 1 seed.
That's another team that really wants to make it to a Final Four as a program.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you think about Kansas State, they are definitely have severe little brother syndrome when it comes to basketball. They've dominated the football side of things for a very long time, and that's not really a rivalry. But when it comes to basketball, they've had some good basketball teams, especially, when they had the South Carolina coach, Frank Martin was there. Frank Martin had, Kansas State, actually, I think better than Kansas for the most time that he was there. But no one ever thinks about it because Kansas State hasn't won a national championship in basketball. Meanwhile, Kansas at this point has, I think, 4 national championships in basketball. And they're considered, one of the top 3 programs or top 4 programs. I think Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, and Kansas are kind of like, and UCLA. Those are like your 5 programs in basketball that are just far and above everybody else. And Kansas State's probably a top 25 all-time program, but nobody thinks about them because of how great Kansas is.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Little Brother. I mean, that's summed up by the nickname for their town, the Little Apple. I mean, it's just right there.
Absolutely, yeah. It's little everything in Manhattan, Kansas. And so that would be a huge thing, I think, for Kansas to, yeah, for Kansas State to win a national championship after Kansas won it last year. You know, it'd be kind of like in my mind when I was a student at Auburn and we won the national championship in 2010. Alabama had just won their first national championship in a very long time in 2009 when they won it. And Auburn comes back and wins the next year. It could be kind of similar for Kansas State if they could do it, because Kansas won one last year, and before that, it had been 14 years, which, 2008 to 2022, that's a long time between national championships for Kansas basketball.
Yeah, and we've seen it. Like, we saw, I think, Duke and UNC go back-to-back in, like, 92, 93. We saw Kentucky, Louisville one year, and then, of course, close to home, we had Ole Miss and State in baseball last year, too.
Yeah, that's true. You see it every now and then, but I think that would be a neat story to see that, especially because, yeah, you're right. I mean, Ole Miss and State, literally, like, the last 2 years have been in college baseball. So,
yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about before we talk about Ole Miss for a second, with Indiana, not only did they get that big win over their rival Purdue, the number 1 overall team, they actually got a great win over Rutgers, which, as much as you and I joke about Rutgers and their athletic woes as a program, I think they had a top 20 basketball team when Purdue beat them, or when Indiana beat them. So that was a big win to come off of the high of beating your rival Purdue and then beat Rutgers pretty handily.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big win to bounce back and not, have that loss, where the win basically allows you to kind of sleepwalk or just not be prepared or be up for the next opponent. So that definitely, to me, says a lot about their, strength for the NCAA tournament.
That's right. So, I think it'd be a great story to get to maybe see that game happen again in the Final Four. And I know in the way these people work, I could see them doing a setup to where Purdue and Indiana can maybe take on each other in the Final Four.
I can see that for sure.
All right, Joe. Well, it's rough of a year has been for Kermit Davis. They got a big win last night against Mike White's Georgia Bulldogs.
That's right, Dan. They won, I think, by 4 points. Mike White, of course, played college basketball at Ole Miss in the 90s. I think he was maybe a teammate of Keith Carter at one point, the AD for Ole Miss. And this was, to me, somewhat of a surprising win. Ole Miss is just their second SEC win so far. However, they do have a chance to actually sweep the week this year, sweep this week, because they play South Carolina on Saturday. So
okay,
another very winnable game on the horizon. But, it's one of those things where they played well last night. Burns had a good game. Jamin Brakefield, the Duke transfer, who I thought was going to be really good when he transferred in a couple of years ago coming from Duke. He had a good game, I think, with over 20 points. Matthew Morrell's back in the lineup. So they did some good things, but it's one of those things where at this point you feel like the writing's on the wall. So, not really sure what this does moving forward. You almost don't want to win too much because you don't want there to be any excuses, not to, do what's inevitable.
Well, Joe, what's sad hearing you say that is, with all the word on the street and the scuttlebutt about how Florida was not happy with Mike White, why didn't they fire Kermit Davis last year and then hire Mike White if he played basketball at Ole Miss? That seems like such a natural fit right there.
Yeah, he was talked about back when he was coaching in the group of five. Like, he was talked about as a candidate for Ole Miss, but it just didn't materialize. I think it was partly because he took the Florida job before the Ole Miss job was open after Kennedy was let go in 2018. But, yeah, that definitely felt like a natural fit.
Yeah. Well, and I think Mike White's done a really good job in this first year at Georgia. I don't think they're going to make the NCAA tournament, but for a while there, they were looking like a fringe tournament team. They beat Auburn at home. And they also, I think they may have, I don't think they beat Tennessee, but they beat Florida, and they had beaten some good teams in the league and had a winning record for a while, but the last couple of weeks they've been going the wrong way. But I think Mike White's definitely making more inroads than Tom Crean was at Georgia.
Yeah, I think so. He's got a good cushion too.
That's right. Joe, this weekend, the wife and I are getting to go to Auburn for Valentine's Day. Friday night, we're going to go get to see Suni Lee in person in Auburn Gymnastics, which I'm really excited about because
this is going to be her last year at Auburn because she's going to start training for the Olympics after this, and that's going to consume her time, which, I mean, completely understandable. That's, that's the height of being a gymnast. And they're going to take on LSU on Friday night, and I'm going to get to go, and I'm just really excited to get to see a real Olympian in person. And, right now, I think Auburn's most famous student athlete.
No, it sounds like that would be a really cool event, Dan. Great atmosphere. And, I don't know enough about gymnastics. I've watched a few matches from time to time on the SEC Network when they'll have it on some days. But, that's an event that I guess it should be on my bucket list to go to at some point.
Yeah, well, what I'm excited about, Joe, is I had to learn a lot of things about even watching gymnastics. So the way the seats are sold is it tells you what event it's going to be close to. So it's like, do you want to sit next to the high beam? Do you want to sit next to the uneven bars? Do you want to sit next to the vault? And I think I ended up going for the vault. I like seeing the one where they run full speed, they handspring off the little spring deal, and they do the flips and they land. So I ended up going with that. And I think that one's also close to the uneven bars, which I always think is really cool to watch. And that's one that Suni Lee's really good at, where you have the bar that's up high, the one that's a little bit more in the middle, and they do all their spins off of it.
That'll be really cool. I know y'all are excited for that.
Definitely. It's going to be a big weekend because not only do you have that huge matchup in gymnastics, I think it's a top 10 matchup, Auburn and LSU both in the top 10. You have College Game Day coming to town, the basketball edition on Saturday, when Auburn is going to host Alabama at the Jungle, which, a little bit of this luster has been taken off this game with Alabama getting beat so badly by Oklahoma, and more so by Auburn dropping these last two games where Auburn's not even ranked in the top 25 anymore. But I think that may be the worst thing that could have happened for Alabama, because this is going to be a very hungry Auburn team that they're going into, and it's going to be a very lit atmosphere.
Yeah, it'll be a fun game. You're really interested to see how that plays out. And I think, it's an interesting storyline with Alabama coming in to the game with the undefeated SEC record. And also just really intrigued to see Brandon Miller, the phenom freshman for Alabama, one of the most talented players that I've seen in the SEC over the last few years.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if he can have just a great game and what's going to be just an incredible atmosphere, and probably the best one that you're going to see maybe this entire season in SEC basketball. And what I'm really fascinated to see is how tough is this Auburn team? They had the worst week they've had all year, losing back-to-back games, including to an A&M team that now swept them and probably is one they shouldn't have lost to either time. How do they respond against this Alabama team who seems to be a shoo-in to be a number one seed? And, is it going to be a positive for them that they have this bad week? And maybe even more so, is it a positive that Auburn got beat at home by Texas A&M a couple of weeks ago, to where they don't have this streak of having the longest winning streak in America at home hanging over their heads? I think that may be a good thing, because right now this Auburn team is going to be incredibly loose. No one is going to expect them to win this game, myself included. And, they got a great chance to shock the world and get their confidence back.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a pivotal game from Alabama's standpoint in Auburn, where I feel like it's a looming hurdle for Alabama to have to go on the road against their rival in this atmosphere. And I almost feel like if they can get through this game and win and survive, they might run the table in the SEC.
I agree. I think this is probably their biggest challenge that they have this year, at least to date, because, I think that they are a better team than Auburn across the board, especially when it comes to their guard play. But like I said, I think this is going to be a very, very tough atmosphere. And let me tell you, the ticket brokers also think this is a game that's going to be quite intense. I was looking at it, and it was $375 for standing room only tickets. So you're paying for what should be an amazing atmosphere in Neville Arena because it's pricey.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to pick Alabama to win the game still, even with all these factors that I have. I think they've responded really well since they got drubbed so bad at Oklahoma. I think that there's going to be a little bit of growing pains. I could see Auburn having a lead at halftime, but I'm so distraught by this Auburn team's ability to hold on to leads, and I think their lack of elite guard play, where even if this game comes down to being close at the end, which I expect it will be, I just don't trust anybody to be able to be a shooter for Auburn and make a shot at the end of the game when it matters.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to quite give them the edge in the game. I feel like it's hard for me to imagine Alabama not winning.
Yeah, and so I'm going to take Alabama. I think it's going to be a close one, though. I think Auburn's going to lose kind of the same way they had against A&M and Tennessee. I'm going to say Alabama wins this one 75-70.
Okay, I was going to say 73-71.
Okay. Well, it should be an exciting game, and I wish I could pick Auburn on this, but I just think that they have some work they have to do, especially when it comes to guards, and I think that there's going to be a lot of impetus too to protect Alabama with that undefeated record they have in the SEC.
Right, and that huge win against Houston to try to bolster that 1 seed.
That's right, exactly. Joe, the last thing, it's been a really cool couple sports weeks for me. I got to be, my usual role in the Senior Bowl committee, go to all the practices last week. I put up a cool reel on Instagram from our Dan and Joe Sports Show Instagram feed that shows a lot of the pictures and videos I took. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the players that I found to be impressive. The first one, not so much because of what he did on the field. I think he did have a couple catches in the game. But from a physical standpoint, I'm interested to see where Will Mallory, the tight end from Miami, goes. I think I sent you this video, but there was a video that I took where it was the tight ends working out. So Cam Latu from Alabama, there was a big Iowa State tight end. And then all of a sudden I see Will Mallory standing next to these guys, and he's 2 to 3 inches taller than even Cam Latu is. And Cam Latu's like 6'5". So I'm thinking this Will Mallory guy is every bit of 6'7", possibly 6'8".
I mean, he sounds just like an amazing athlete. And we talked about on the show, I think last week, how the tight end position at the next level is such a premium position. And you can get these guys in later rounds. We'll talk about Travis Kelce in a later segment with the Super Bowl preview. I think he was a 3rd or 4th round pick. And so you may really have a steal with this guy. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. I think he was someone that if I was, one of the many NFL GMs and scouts that I saw there, he'd be one I'd be taking a huge look at.
Right.
I'll tell you someone else who really showed out, and it's someone that got some publicity, really got a lot of publicity during the Sugar Bowl, and that was Tyjae Spears, the running back for Tulane. Of course, he did a great job making USC look silly, but that was against a defense that, let's be honest, USC had a little bit of a porous defense. So, I mean, that was something that, you almost kind of expected that of him. But I saw him against the best of the Senior Bowl, making them look silly. And it wasn't just running the football. He was doing passing drills, and I watched him go up against Georgia DBs, knock him off on, be strong on him, and then go through and catch passes against him. I mean, the guy was unbelievable, and not just his ability to run, but his ability to catch passes. And he came out as by far what I thought to be the best running back at the Senior Bowl.
I can see him being a really good value selection. Maybe we're a team that's already been a playoff team that gets a later pick, in like the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. Maybe they want to take a flyer on him, and that could definitely be a steal.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he looks a little bit like, maybe I wouldn't say an Alvin Kamara, because I feel like he's a little bit of a stronger runner than Kamara is. Maybe more like the Viking, like Dalvin Cook. He gave me like a very Dalvin Cook kind of vibe with the way he ran.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely worth a selection and probably could be a starter from right out the gate.
That's right. I'll tell you who else really just blew my mind. I was talking about how Tyjae Spears was working some Georgia DBs. Well, he wasn't working this one, and that's Chris Smith. Chris Smith was just as good as advertised. And when I was watching the DB receiver drills, I was keeping a special eye on him. I never saw them complete a pass against him.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like somebody to keep an eye on. And, a lot of times in the NFL draft, I'm not as high on drafting DBs in the early rounds, but we did see the impact that Sauce Gardner had with the Jets this year. So definitely a player to watch out for here.
Yeah, I mean, and you could just see how heady of a player he was. I mean, he's the guy who, when the field goal got blocked against LSU, he let the ball sit there on the ground, watched everybody for 2 seconds, and when he realized the LSU guys weren't paying attention, picked up and returned it for a touchdown.
And you can just tell he's a very well-trained player. And like I said, I mean, he was just killing it with those one-on-one drills.
Sounds like his presence is definitely known on the field.
Absolutely. I thought from the Auburn standpoint, Derek Hall looked good. I saw him make some good run stops, and I think he now has probably elevated himself to where he's a potential first-round draft pick. I don't know that he's all the way, is for sure thing in the first round, but I think there's a better than 50% chance he's going to be a first-round draft pick. And it was kind of cool. I got to watch the end of the practice with his family. His family's from Gulfport. I went over there and talked to him for a while. They were really nice. That was when I was getting to hang out with Ronnie Brown. Ronnie Brown, I got to drive him around, which was a huge deal for me as an Auburn fan. When he was my favorite, he was my favorite offensive player from that 2004 team. Of course, Junior Rosegreen is my favorite player. We've had him on the show a lot of times. But Ronnie Brown was always my favorite running back of the Carnell Cadillac, the Cadillac and Ronnie Brown duo, and that was cool getting to meet him and hang out with him for the day.
Well, I thought of a question on that. I've heard a lot of people that root for Auburn tell me that Ronnie Brown was their favorite. Do you know anybody that picked Cadillac as their favorite?
That's a good question. I don't know that I ever have heard anybody say that Cadillac was their favorite. If you watch those Auburn games really closely back then, like I did, Ronnie Brown was the better running back. He was, of course, the one that got drafted number 2 overall, where Cadillac got drafted number 6. I love Cadillac. He's done a great job coaching. The problem he had was he was very injury prone. He wasn't quite, he wasn't quite as strong as Ronnie Brown was in the right places to be able to avoid injuries. And that's why Cadillac was able to be Rookie of the Year in the NFL, but didn't make it much past that. Meanwhile, Ronnie Brown, he got injured a few times, but he lasted 10 years in the league and made a couple Pro Bowls. And for a running back, 10 years in the league is a very long time nowadays.
It really is, no doubt.
Yeah. He gave me a little bit of Auburn insights. I tried to get some news on the quarterback battle from him about whether or not Hugh Freeze was a big Robbie Ashford fan. And he seems to think that they're still going after another quarterback. He said he likes Robbie Ashford, but he thinks that they're still going to get somebody else is what he thinks.
Okay. That would be interesting.
Yeah. It was interesting, though. He told me, too, that, the game that Junior Rosegreen talked about, the Tennessee game where he had 3 interceptions, well, Ronnie Brown had 200 yards rushing in that game. And that was probably his best game where they went into Knoxville and they beat a number 7 Tennessee team. And so it's kind of interesting that both of those guys that now I've gotten to know on the 2004 team both had their best games of their career against Tennessee that night.
That is interesting. Very, very ironic.
That's right. All right, Joe. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl prop bets. We like to do our locker room talk about this every year. It's always fun to see the unique bets that they have coming out for the game. And if you want to catch us on the next line, you will get to hear about all the unique prop bets, from Gatorade colors to mentions of Kelsey brothers to, who knows, maybe Andy Reid wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And you can catch all of our episodes on Spotify. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and catch all of our latest YouTube videos. You can subscribe to my Instagram and follow me at Dan and Joe Sports Show on Instagram and check out all my cool reels like I had from the Senior Bowl. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.